New Orleans, September 1894. The rain fell warm that night, thick as breath, turning the gaslit streets into rivers of bronze. From the balconies of Royal Street, music drifted down like perfume cornets crying softly, a piano stumbling through a hymn that had forgotten its church. Carriages splashed through puddles, their wheels hissing, while beneath striped awnings, men leaned close, trading whispers and cigars. Inside the old St. Charles Theater, the house lights dimmed and a hush spread, slow and reverent, as if the city itself had paused to listen. At center stage stood a woman dressed in black silk, her gloves folded carefully in her hands. She was not tall. She was not young. Yet when she lifted her head, something in the room shifted. The orchestra waited, the audience leaned forward, and in that fragile silence, she began to sing. Her voice was low, weathered, carrying the ache of years spent listening more than speaking. It moved through the hall like smoke, touching each listener differently, memory for one, regret for another, forgiveness for those who dared accept it. Some said later that they felt as though she were singing only to them. Others claimed the sound followed them into the street long after the curtain fell. Lingering in the rain, her name that night was Miss Eliza Gray, celebrated contralto, survivor of tragedy, the woman who had vanished for 20 years and returned, with a voice shaped by sorrow, but that was not the name she was born with. Good evening, my friends. Wherever you are listening from tonight, beneath city lights, or in the quiet shelter of your own thoughts, welcome back to Darkest Lives, where forgotten souls speak again. If these stories keep you company in the dark, do consider subscribing before we drift deeper. Tonight, we follow the life of a woman history nearly erased, a woman who crossed the boundaries of race, class, and silence in a century that punished such courage. This is the story of Eleanor Mayfield, a life measured not in applause, but in endurance. Let us begin far from New Orleans, far from music and gaslight. Let us return to a small plantation road outside Mississippi, in the spring of 1856. Eleanor was born just before dawn, when the fog lay low along the river, and the frogs sang as if warning the world of her arrival. Her mother, Ruth Mayfield, labored in a narrow cabin with only her sister beside her, hands trembling, jaw set tight against the pain. No doctor was sent for. None would have come. When the child finally cried, sharp and fierce, Ruth laughed through her tears. "She's loud," she whispered. She live. Eleanor's father was never named aloud. In the quiet language of the plantation, everyone understood enough. Ruth worked the kitchens. She was known for her calm, for her habit of humming while she scrubbed pots or kneaded dough. Music, for her, was not entertainment, it was survival. Eleanor grew up inside those songs, rocked to sleep by them, taught to breathe in time with their rise and fall. The cabin smelled of ash and cornmeal. Sunlight came through the cracks in the walls, thin as ribbon. From the start, Eleanor listened. Before she spoke clearly, she echoed sounds bird calls, the clatter of spoons, the long notes her mother sang when she thought no one was paying attention. By the time Eleanor was 5, people stopped outside the cabin just to hear her sing. She got the river in her throat, the old men said, but the river takes as much as it gives. Eleanor learned early how to be invisible. She kept her eyes lowered when white folks passed. She memorized the sound of approaching boots. She learned when to speak and when silence was safer. Her mother taught her this gently, with a look rather than words. At night, Ruth would braid Eleanor's hair and tell her stories of Africa remembered only in rhythm, of women who spoke to spirits, of voices that could break chains. "Your voice is a gift," Ruth said once, her fingers warm against Eleanor's scalp. "But gifts draw attention. You must choose when to open your hand." The war came like a storm felt before it was seen. Men left. Rumors traveled faster than truth. When Union soldiers finally passed through, the plantation emptied itself of certainty. Freedom arrived, not as a celebration, but as a question mark. Ruth took Eleanor north along the river. Following work, sleeping where they could. They sang for coins. In towns where the night was less cruel, Eleanor stood on crates and sang hymns, her voice too old for her small body. People listened. Some wept, some paid. Some stared as though seeing a ghost. It was in Cairo, Illinois, that Eleanor first saw a piano. It stood in the corner of a boarding house parlor. Its keys yellowed, one leg cracked. The woman who owned it played after supper, slow and careful. Eleanor stood frozen, as if afraid to breathe. When the woman finished, Eleanor asked if she could touch it. Just once. Her fingers barely reached the keys. She pressed one. The sound startled her, bright and clean. She pressed another. Soon she was picking out the melody her mother always sang at night. The woman watched, astonished. She hears what she needs before she knows how, she said. That night changed everything. Ruth worked extra hours to pay for lessons. Eleanor learned quickly, hungrily. Music became a language she could speak fluently, one that gave her power without permission. By 16, she could read sheet music, could transpose on the fly, could sing harmonies that made rooms fall silent. But the world still had rules. When Ruth fell ill quietly, stubbornly, there was no money for doctors. Eleanor sang beside her bed as her mother faded. The songs slowing, softening, until there was nothing left to follow. Ruth died holding Eleanor's hand. Her last breath, a sigh that sounded almost like relief. Eleanor was alone. She joined a traveling troupe out of necessity. They billed her as the Colored Nightingale, a name she hated but accepted. She sang in back rooms, saloons, halls that smelled of sweat and whiskey. She learned how applause could be both nourishment and theft. Men praised her voice and ignored her humanity. Women admired her talent and warned her to be careful. It was during one of these tours that she met Thomas Gray. He was a violinist, pale and intense, with hands that shook when he played anything too joyful. He listened to Eleanor as if she were the only sound left in the world. When he spoke softly, with reverence. They practiced together, late into the night, trading melodies like confessions. Love came quietly, the way it often does when it knows it is forbidden. They married in secret in Ohio, a ceremony so small it felt like a rumor. For a while, they believed they had outrun the world. But the world is patient. When Thomas fell ill, the doctors came willingly. When Eleanor asked questions, they spoke over her. When Thomas died, the papers listed him as unmarried. His family took his belongings, his music, his name. Eleanor buried her grief and kept singing until one night, in a town that did not care to remember her kindness, a man in the audience shouted a word that cracked something open inside her. She finished the song. Then she walked away. For 20 years, she disappeared. No one knows exactly where she went. Some say she worked as a laundress in Chicago. Others claim she taught music to children in Detroit. There are rumors of her singing in churches under borrowed names. Of a woman with a voice like dusk, who asked for nothing in return. What is certain is this: when she returned, she was different. New Orleans welcomed her cautiously at first. The city knew pain. It recognized it. Her voice, now deeper, carried the weight of survival. She did not sing to impress. She sang to tell the truth. That night at the St. Charles Theater, as the final note faded, there was silence. Then, slowly, the audience rose. Applause rolled forward like thunder. Eleanor stood still, hands folded, eyes closed. She did not bow deeply. She had already given enough. Eleanor Gray sang for another 6 years. Then she taught. She lived quietly near the river, where the sound of water reminded her of beginnings. When she died in 1902, there was no grand funeral, only music drifting from an open window, carried into the humid air. Some lives are not meant to be loud forever. Some are meant to endure, to leave echoes rather than monuments. And if you listen closely, on warm nights when the city hums low and steady, you might still hear her. Not calling for attention, just reminding the world that she was here. Good night, my friends. Wherever you are, may your own voice find its moment.